بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Um, I want to read something to you. I don't know if I have the PDF. One second. This is a really good chapter that helps this discussion. So, Imam Majah wa Sunanihi. Does exist. Alhamdulillah. Don't know if it's the same. I have this page on page 79, which is in the same. I think it is the same, 79. Okay. الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا ما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. We are going to look right now at the small chapter on making wudu for eating camel meat. Okay, there are at least two Sahih hadiths that tell us that if you eat camel meat, it makes you breaks wudu. This is the ikhtiyar, this is the position of the Hanbalis, and it's the ikhtiyar of Imam Nawawi. Imam Nawawi, he says, there's these two Sahih hadiths, and there's no really way of interpreting it any other way, and that's correct. Like if you eat camel meat, it breaks your wudu. This particular um, this particular mas'ala is very a good idea of the difference of two different manhajes. One manhaj is if there's no ijma', then I'm going to look at a sahih hadith and I'm going to follow it. Right? That's it. Is there ijma' on this issue? No. Okay. And ijma' is quite hard to prove. So basically, sahih hadith prevails. That's one methodology. That's the methodology of our author. That's the kind of world that he's working in. Okay? Then we have the other approach, which is fiqh of the great fuqaha of the Salaf prevails. So there's a big difference between consensus and the great fuqaha of the Salaf. So you're going to be in Kufa, and you're going to be in Kufa and you're going to say, listen, this is the fatwa of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. That's what I need to know. Thank you very much. You can quote a hadith or not quote a hadith. It really doesn't matter. It's not an issue about me following the Prophet or not. The issue is I know who knows the Sunnah of the Prophet. Is it this hadith narrator or this faqih? It's this faqih. Right? So it's a bit like this. If I came along and said, oh, grammatically, it's not valid to say that. Say, well, that's what I learned from my tajweed teacher. So I don't really care. Like, this is how we do it in tajweed. This is how the Quran has been narrated in tajweed. It doesn't matter if your grammar rule breaks this or not. It doesn't matter. I don't really care. Not relevant to me. right? So who has monopoly over the deen? The a hadith being narrated by a reliable narrator, or a faqih who studied with fuqaha, who studied with the great fuqaha of the Salaf, and he says that's this how it is. Does that make sense? These are these two different things. And so a key difference is when you say great fuqaha versus fuqaha, because there are all sorts of fuqaha. But a Hanafi would say, for example, those of you who are in the class, the Muwatta class, what somebody comes up to Ibrahim al-Nakhai and he says, "What's this whole issue about Raf'al Yadayn? There's a hadith that my dad tells me he narrated from so and so that the Prophet used to raise his hands before going in and out of ruku'. So I have a Sahih hadith." So Ibrahim Nakhai says, "I'm not really sure, but that's not what the students of Abdullah Mas'ud did. So therefore, I'm just gonna respectfully ignore your hadith." Because in his world, it's not possible for the students of Abdullah Mas'ud to not know these things. These guys are too great. They're like super scholars, right? So, and other people are taking their hat, and then not just other people, people in the time of Ibrahim Nakhai from other cities are coming. They're like, "Oh, Ibrahim Nakhai, khalas, can't speak in front of him." People are coming from Medina, people are coming from Mecca, and it's like, khalas, just that's it. So do we just give this absolute authority to the fuqaha of the Salaf or these great fuqaha of the Salaf and just follow them, or do we follow hadith? The question is, how has the deen been preserved? Through the fiqh of the fuqaha or through the hadiths of the muhaddithin? They both go back to the Prophet ﷺ, right? So it's not an issue of asanid, nor is an issue of sunnah. But the question is, which is the best preservation of the sunnah? That's the question. Is everyone following me?
Yes.
Okay. So he says
Yeah.
this is a Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Rashid Nu'mani, and I don't even know who that person is, and I didn't. All I bought, so I saw a book. It says "I'tana bihi Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda." So if Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda wrote a book, it should be bought, even if it's on, I don't know, the science of using a Q-tip, right? It doesn't matter. Like he was such a scholar that it doesn't matter who he was. So anyway, so he got this book, and he did the tahqiq of it, notes, introduction, etc. So I bought it, and so it's basically what it is Ibn Majah. He talks about basically Ibn Majah, and then goes through certain hadiths that have been alleged to be fabricated. Are they fabricated or not? Are they super weak or not, etc. In the beginning, though, he has like a very long introduction to the book, right? And it's really, really important, right? It's a really important book. So this is page whatever 70. I'm pretty sure this is how it is in the print, page 79. So I just want to read this section before we go into this hadith. Okay. So it says ظهور أمور على رأس المئتين أدت بالمحدثين إلى مخالفة طريق الأقدمين. Okay. So it says something that happened from the year 200 on, right? Imam Shafi comes onto the scene, or finishes coming to the scene, right? And now we suddenly see this difference between hadith being a science of preserving words versus hadith being a science of preserving words and defining halal and haram. Okay? A change. So it says, وَعَلَى ذَلِكَ مَضَى الْقَرْنَانِ الْأَوَّلُ وَالثَّانِي. He says, basically, we had basically great scholars, studied great scholars. Imam Abu Hanifa, he studies with um, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, who studies with Ibrahim al-Nakhai, who studies with the students of Abdullah Mas'ud, who studies with the Prophet ﷺ. And Abdullah Mas'ud, understood by everybody, great faqih, and khalas, end of story. So how does fiqh work? Fiqh works like tajweed, in that you study fiqh with fuqaha and you become a mufti, like fatwa like that. As for hadith, that's a different circle. The muhaddithin of the Sahaba are different people, right? Just like the muqri'een are one circle. So sometimes you might be in both circles, right? Like al-A'mash is a qari. Al-A'mash is also a hadith narrator, right? Asim ibn Najud is a good hadith narrator, not an amazing one, but he's a imam in tajweed and Quran, right? So there's different circles. The circles of seerah narration versus hadith narration, right? The circles of grammar versus circles of poetry versus the circles of hadith or fiqh or tafsir. Circles of tafsir, they're not the same as the circles of fiqh or hadith, they're not the same. Okay? So basically, fiqh is done by fuqaha. The fuqaha, the Sahaba, those of you who've listened to my lectures about development of fiqh, for example, it's Ali ibn Abi Dini talking about here the key fuqaha, the Sahaba. You are a student of a key faqih of the Sahaba. That makes you a faqih, right? Irrespective of what the people in Hadith are doing. That's two different worlds. So he says that there's a change. He said, وعلى ذلك مضى القرنان الأولان الأول والثاني ثم ظهر على رأس المئتين أمور كبحت عينان المحدثين عن الجريان على الطريق الأقدمين. كبحت, hold back. Suddenly, the muhaddithin, so people like Al-A'mash, this is again somewhat of a simplification, but he said basically people like Al-A'mash, like Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi Muhaddith, he was Maliki basically, just goes to what the Medinans do. Al-A'mash, Kufan, right? He goes and asks the fuqaha, what should we do? Right? That's your world. What the hadith that we narrate are one thing, fiqh is the world of the fuqaha, right? The rules, concepts, systems is a totally different thing. So he says عدم احتياج السلف إلى علم أسماء الرجال بقرب العصر وإمعان المتأخرين فيه حتى جرهم ذلك إلى إنكار المرسل. So he says what happened was the early scholars, you are Ibrahim al-Nakhai, you saw Aisha with your own eyes, right? Or even Imam Abu Hanifa, right? He saw Sayyidina Anas, he was 10 with Sayyidina Anas. So the whole issue about asanid and this chain and that chain is kind of like academic. Like I don't really need to know that kind of stuff. Right? Whereas for the muhaddithin, I am now living 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ. Chain of transmission, gaps in change is suddenly really, really big. So it says منها أن الأسانيد لم يكن السلف يحتاجون إلى النظر فيها لقرب العصر وممارسة النقلة, they are alive with them, وخبرتهم بهم. وكانت أحوال نقلة الحديث في عصور الصحابة والتابعين معروفة عند أهل بلدهم. We know what's going on. منهم بالحجاز, everybody knows everybody, right? These are the people you know in your masajid, etc. والجميع معروفون مشهورون في أعصارهم فكانوا يعتمرون في معرفة الرجال وعدالتهم على ما يخلص إليهم من مشاهدة الحال وتتبع القرائن. You live there, you see them. فلما انقرض السلف وذهب الصدر الأول أمعنا من to go look in detail من جاء بعدهم من أهل القرن الثالث في معرفة الرجال ومراتب هؤلاء النقلة, right? So for those of you who are familiar with the story of a Shu'bah, when he's saying who did you narrate this hadith from? Oh, so and so, from so and so, from so and so, from so and so. All of that began very late. That's something late. The science of hadith comes after the science, and those whole problems of where's the gap in the chain, all these things, this comes way later, way after fiqh. وتفاوتهم في ذلك وتميزهم فيه واحدا جرحا وتعديلا وحفظا وإتقانا حتى جعلوا فنا برأسه ودونوا فيه مدونات. It became a whole thing. وبحثوا وناظروا في الحكم بالصحة والضعف والاتصال والانقطاع وغير ذلك إلى أن إلى أن جرهم ذلك إلى إنكار المرسل. So then you have the question of the mursal hadith. He says قال الشيخ الإسلام حافظ أصل العراقي قال محمد بن جرير الطبري إن التابعين أجمعوا بأسرهم على قبول مرسل ولم يأتي عنهم إنكاره ولا أحدا من الأئمة بعدهم إلى رأس المئتين, right, until the year 200-ish. فهؤلاء اصطلحوا على تقسيم الحديث إلى صحيح وحسن وضعيف ومرسل ومنقطع ومعضل وغير ذلك من أنواع معروفة في أصول الحديث. ثم ردوا من ذلك المرسل وما بعده. So that's why in Sahih Bukhari you're going to say that you're not going to find a mursal hadith in Sahih Bukhari or in Sahih Muslim. وأما السلف فلم يكن عندهم الفرق بين المرسل والصحيح والحسن. يطلقون المرسل على المنقطع والمعضل. فأطلت عند هؤلاء كثير من السنن. So this whole book that we're looking at now, suddenly any hadith that's mursal will not be there. Right? التي كان السلف يأخذون بها. So the Salaf might have been using these hadiths, now they won't use them anymore. Right? And Imam Shafi wrote a whole thing, we don't use mursal hadiths. Right? I'm going to skip this thing here. It says اهتمام الحفاظ بمعرفة طرق الحديث وتفحصهم عن غرائبه وإنكارهم الاحتجاج بقول الصحابي والعمل المتوارث. And again, this is all Imam Shafi. Imam Shafi saying Sahabi is not a prophet. You can't just blindly follow a prophet. You can't follow mursal hadith. Right? So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying here's an argument against it. That's all. ومنها أنهم قد عني الحفاظ في هذا القرن بمعرفة طرق الحديث وأسانيدها المختلفة فرحلوا إلى أقطار الأرض وبحثوا عن حملة العلم وجمعوا الكتب وتتبعوا النسخ وأمعنوا في التفحص عن غريب الحديث ونوادر الأثر وربما وقع إسناد الحديث من طرق متعددة من رواة المختلفين حتى كان تجتمع عندهم من أحاديث 100 طريق فما فوقها. So they're traveling the whole Muslim world, different chains, finding errors. There's a whole reason for that. Okay. فهؤلاء ظنوها أحاديث صحيحة ولم يكن عندهم في التشريع أصول عامة يرجع إليها المجتهد ولا أصول خاصة بالأبواب المختلفة فكانوا لا يعتمدون في ذلك على قواعد من الأصول كاعتماد الفقهاء الذين مضوا قبلهم. So the fuqaha, they already have concepts and principles and rules, whereas they're not doing that. فظهر الاختلاف في صنيع هؤلاء وصنيع من قدمنا ذكرهم من الأئمة الماضين في القرن الثاني. فأخذ هؤلاء بالروايات التي جمعوها ودونوها وحرروها ونقحوها وصححوها على ميزان الرجال. I'm not interested in who you studied with of the fuqaha. I'm interested, are you accurate? That's all. I'm interested, is there consensus against the hadith? A. And B, is there is it sahih? That's all. على ميزان الرجال. So rijal is you are ثقة, you're reliable. Do you make mistakes? دون تلقي الأئمة الفقهاء من الصحابة والتابعين. Right? So this phrase sounds like they're accepting hadiths that go against ijma'. That's not true. But again, I repeat, the difference between, let's say, Imam Malik or Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Abu Hanifa, as an example, he could have studied with Hamad ibn Zayd. He could have studied with Hamad ibn Salama, muhaddithin. But he went and studied with a non-hadith teacher, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman. Why did he do that? Because he's a faqih. It's like saying, I could have studied, imagine this right today, as just a very extreme scenario. You could have gone and studied linguistics at University of SOAS in London. We could have gone and studied Tajweed with the student of Sheikh Abdul Basit. You say, well, why did you go? Like, if you study linguistics, you'll know all the different kind of sounds you could make and why you'd make this sound and that sound. So why are you going to study with Sheikh Abdul Basit? Oh, because the student of Sheikh Abdul Basit is a narrator of how the Prophet recited the Quran and how the Salaf recited the Quran. So I want to do that. Yeah, but if you go to linguistics, you'll know all these different things anyway. You see the difference? Right? So there's a bit of an extreme example, right?
Can you actually repeat that, please?
So imagine somebody studying linguistics, okay, and then focusing on Semite linguistics and subtleties in pronouncing words in Arabic at a university like SOAS in London or Yale, right? Versus somebody studying with a sheikh who is a specialist in tajweed, right? So there's you're obviously going to go study with someone in tajweed because that's how the Quran has reached you. So it's a little bit like that, in that here is a hadith, right? Here is a hadith, and it's rated by somebody who in principle does not make mistakes. But that person is not necessarily faqih and did not study with fuqaha, nor did take this fiqh from a faqih. Okay? He's just quoting. And his sheikh is the same thing. So what happened then is the criterion for someone like Imam Malik or criterion for someone like Imam Abu Hanifa is very different than the criterion for Imam Shafi'i. So Imam Shafi'i comes along, this is in the beginning now of the 3rd century, and says, hang on a minute. If the hadith is sahih, فهو madhabi. Here's a hadith. It is not known in Medina, and it's not known in Iraq. That doesn't matter. In fact, even if I don't know it, add it to my madhab. Even if I don't know this in my whole lifetime, still add it to my madhab. Here's a hadith. From so-and-so who's reliable, from so-and-so who's reliable, that is a proof. Khalas. Right? As long as it doesn't go against ijma'. That's the criterion. Is it sahih? Does it go against ijma'? That's it. Does it go against certain systems? That doesn't matter. Does it go against what is well known among the great fuqaha of the salaf? That doesn't matter. As long as it doesn't go against consensus. Does that make sense? So this issue of here where he says right. Let's go back to this previous thing. Here he said um so he says فكانوا لا يعتمدون في ذلك على قواعد من الأصول كاعتماد الفقهاء الذين مضوا قبلهم. um where is it? So he says دون تلقي الأئمة الفقهاء من الصحابة والتابعين. This phrase here sounds like he's saying that it goes against everything, right? We're not saying that. He says سواء عمل بهذا الصحابة فقهاء أم لم يعملوا بها. That's not quite true though, right? They're saying if it goes against ijma'. So here's the issue. You go say, did any of the Sahaba and Tabi'een ever have this opinion? Yes. Okay, fine. We're going to go with it. If it agrees with the hadith. Does that make sense? So Imam Shafi'i, he really paved the way for the let the text speak, if that makes sense. Right? Like imagine, for example, you come along and say, like, everybody interprets Shakespeare like this. I'm like, hang on a minute, guys. Just because everyone's been interpreting Shakespeare like that, that doesn't mean that's the only way. Okay? There are other ways of looking at this text. Let the text speak. Right? That's what Imam Shafi'i's doing. That's why he comes along with al-am and khas and all these systems. He's going to have let this text speak. The text is speaking. Let the Prophet ﷺ speak, for crying out loud. Right? He's called Nasir as-Sunnah. Like, what is the Sunnah? The Sunnah is the words of the Prophet ﷺ alone. Let the text speak. Right? If there's something that's going to qualify the words of the Prophet ﷺ, find me a hadith that qualifies the words of the Prophet ﷺ, not a fatwa of a Sahabi. Does that make sense? Even if the person who is narrating the hadith is not a scholar, right? That doesn't matter. That's not how it works, right? And then look at this scenario as well. He says here, he says, فكثر عندهم من الأحاديث التي لا يرويها إلا تدرد right عن أبيه right مع كون الصحابي مقلا غير معروف برواية ولا يرويها عنه إلا رجل أو رجلان. So you're going to have somebody who is not even known. He's not a famous Sahabi at all. And suddenly his hadith, right, is going to define something. I'll give you an example in the Shafi school, right? And I'm not criticizing, just exposing, right? In the Shafi school, we have something called جلسة الاستراحة. Okay? جلسة الاستراحة. Right? That when you come out of the first or third rak'ah, you pause, then you get up. Okay? This hadith is narrated by Malik ibn Huwayrith, Sahabi. So is he was a great mufti of the Sahaba? No. So why are you following him? So the Shafis would say, is he a liar? No, he's not a liar. Okay. Is he reliable? Yeah. Okay, so Sahabis are reliable, right? So this is Sahabi. He's reliable. He said, I saw the Prophet do this. So are you trying to assume that he's A, mistaken, or B, that he's lying? Neither. Okay, so then why are you not following it? Oh, because Abdullah Mas'ud didn't say that. Okay, Abdullah Mas'ud doesn't know everything, does he? Abdullah ibn Abbas didn't do it. Okay. Is this against ijma'? Like you don't find any of the Muslims ever saying that? No. Okay, there are some of the Salaf that said it, right? Or did it. Okay. So therefore it's not against ijma'. A. B. Here's a hadith narrated by somebody. It is not a condition that he be a faqih, right? Because the faqih doesn't know everything. And in fact, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? The Prophet ﷺ said, رب رب حامل فقه إلى من هو أفقه منه. It may be somebody that carries fiqh to somebody who knows better than them, right? So you might hear the Prophet ﷺ say something, you narrate it to a tabi'i, that tabi'i understands 50 things from that hadith that you didn't understand, right? So is it really a condition that things be narrated by fuqaha to fuqaha to fuqaha, and that's how it is, right? But there's a good point, right? Not all the Sahaba understood everything. Maybe he misunderstood what the Prophet ﷺ was doing because he only spent like a week with the Prophet ﷺ. Why would I, right? He only spent a week with the Prophet ﷺ, so why would I rely on that? Somebody who narrates a hadith from Imam Malik just spent a month with Imam Malik, whereas somebody narrating fiqh from Imam Malik, like Ibn Qasim, who spent 20 years with Imam Malik, right? This is the difference here. It's not a simple difference, but it is an important difference. So it says, فَظَهَرَ الْإِخْتِلَافُ فِي صَنِيعٍ, how these guys did things and how these people did things, right? فأخذ هؤلاء بهذه الروايات التي جمعوها ودونوها وحرروها ونقحوها. So that's an example. Drinking while standing up, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يشربن أحدكم قائما ومن نسي فليستقع. Right? Sahih Muslim. Let none of you ever drink standing up. And if you drink standing up, then let him throw up. So the hadith would indicate that it's A, haram to drink standing up, and B, that if you drink standing up, you should throw up. But is that any of the fuqaha say that? No. So the Shafis, we say it's offensive to drink standing up, right? But if you applied their principles, you could probably find one of the Salaf that said it was haram to drink standing up, and then you say there's no ijma', and you can follow the hadith, khalas. So who has monopoly? The fiqh of the fuqaha, the fiqh concepts and rules that the fuqaha shared of the Salaf, or majority of them, or the key ones of them, or hadith, right? That's the question. بهذه التي جمعوها ودونوها وحرروها ونقحوها وصححوا على ميزان الرجال, based on who's narrating, that's all. دون تلقي الأئمة الفقهاء, الأئمة الفقهاء, not just الفقهاء, the great imam من الصحابة التابعين, like Ibn Abbas, like so and so. ولم يكن عندهم فرق في ذلك سواء عمل بها الصحابة أو الفقهاء أم لم يعملوا بها, فعضوا عليها بالنواجذ, they stuck tight to them, وجعلوها قاضية على محتمل القرآن, right? Anything the Quran could say, the hadith takes precedence now. وخصوا بها عام الكتاب, and anything that's universal in the Quran, suddenly qualified by this hadith that's narrated by this person who's not even a faqih, but he is reliable. وطرحوا قول كل صحابي, that's a hyperbole, right? They ignored the position of every sahabi, right? Again, they right? That's not contradiction. وفتوى كل تابع يخالف مروياتهم حتى جرهم ذلك إلى قول إنهم رجال ونحن رجال, right? And that's exactly what Imam Shafi says. Imam Shafi says you cannot do taqleed of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. If there's consensus, yes, but otherwise you can't do that. And then he goes on to an example here, right? Okay, so he goes on to another thing here, right? So here's an example, right? So in the Shafi school and the Hanbali school, we have this issue. It goes on to what's called the hadith of, where is it? Of Qullatayn, right? So we say the hadith إذا بلغ الماء قلتين لم يحمل الخبث. When water reaches two qullas, then it can't get filthy anymore. So for in the Shafi school we say, or the Hanbali school we say, if it's more than two qullas, then it only becomes filthy through change. If it's less than two qullas, it becomes filthy through um, through mere contact, right? So it mentions all these different chains, some of them from Abdullah ibn Umar, etc. They all go back. It says what kilahuma an Abdullah ibn Umar, right? Okay. So now this is the question, right? Imagine you are Imam Malik or you're the student of Imam Malik, and I turn up to you and I say there's a hadith that says water becomes filthy. Da, 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 here's my chain transmission. So Imam Malik, you're the student of Imam Malik. You spent 20 years with Imam Malik. Imam Malik studied with Nafi', the most important narrator from Abdullah ibn Umar. So you're looking at me like, bro, I really don't care if this hadith is sahih or not. Why? I studied 20 years with Imam Malik. Imam Malik studied with Nafi'. Nafi' studied with Ibn Umar. Ibn Umar never said anything like this. How did it escape Ibn Umar? Right? Right? So he says, ومن المعلوم أن هذا لم يرويه غير ابن عمر ولا عن ابن عمر غير عبيد الله بن عبد الله. Right? فأين نافع وسالم وأيوب وسعيد بن جبير. Right? So what your criterion is sahih, meaning it's narrated by a reliable person from a reliable person from a reliable person, irrespective of their fiqh skills. A. B. It doesn't go against consensus. Consensus is quite a hard thing to do, right? Another example in the Shafi school, right? Another example in the Shafi school is the hadith, well-known hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and other places. The Prophet ﷺ joined Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. Right? In Medina, they used to just join Dhuhr and Maghrib and Isha in rain. Right? The Prophet ﷺ joined Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha. Imam Malik says, I think it's in rain. Ibn Umar used to join in rain. Imam Shafi comes along and says, the hadith says Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. So why are we saying just Dhuhr and Asr? Why are we just saying Maghrib and Isha? Right? Is there consensus? No. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz joined. Okay, خلاص. So Imam Malik would say we don't do this in Medina, therefore there must be a misunderstanding in the hadith. Imam Shafi says, hadith says it, there's no consensus. What they do in Medina or don't do in Medina is not a proof. Right? Okay, so there are certain simplifications on both sides. Certain simplification on both sides, but it's important to understand that. Okay, so now, in that, is everyone following me?
Yes.
Right. So one criterion is the hadith sahih? Check. Is there consensus against it? No. Okay, roll with the hadith. Other one is that your whole criterion is off. Fiqh is taken from the fuqaha. What the fuqaha share and say, that's the deen. Whether you know the proof, they don't know the proof. Whether it's sahih hadith, it doesn't matter. That's totally it's a totally different thing. Right? Your whole criterion is off. Right? So now we go to back to our book. Where was our book? And it says al-wudu min luhum al-ibil. Okay? And so we say, is there ijma' that eating camel meat does not break wudu? There is no ijma'. Okay. Thank you very much. Is the hadith sahih? Yes. Okay, khalas, breaks your wudu. So even though it's not the Shafi school, it is the Shafi usul would dictate that. Like the Shafi usul la ta'bahu, right? It's not against it. It is the Hanbali school, and it's not going against, like when Imam Nawawi says that, it means it's fitting with the whole paradigm of the Shafi school, right? Even though the Shafi school is otherwise. But if you look at these people are all fuqaha, right? Not necessarily, right? Is this what, for example, the Kufans used to say? Is this something in Kufan fiqh, like the students of Abdullah Mas'ud, they used to say that if you eat camel meat, it breaks your wudu? No, right? It's not. Here we have, for example, Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla, right? Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla, did he hold? So he narrates this hadith from Al-Bara. Did he hold that, so he was this key contender with Imam Abu Hanifa, like these the debates between Ibn Abi Layla. This is Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla, and uh, and unless I'm mixing him up with his son. No, that's Muhammad, sorry. Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman ibn Layla. Anyway, so he's a key hadith narrator. But let's say, for example, let's go and ask Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla, who was that key, he had key debates with Imam Abu Hanifa. Did he, your dad narrated this hadith, so is that your fatwa? He probably didn't have that fatwa, right? That eating cow meat breaks your wudu. You go to Medina, Imam Malik tells us right in the beginning of the Muwatta, it doesn't matter what you eat or not, eating cooked meat and the like does not break wudu, right? Meat or whatever, that's nothing. There's nothing to, that's not how the fuqaha talk about. Like eating meat does not break wudu, period, right? You go to some other school of fiqh, maybe the Damascans, maybe the Meccans, maybe Layth ibn Sa'd in Egypt, maybe the Basrans, right? So if you look at the debate, we can just do it quickly now. Right, quick look at the debate. You open up Musannaf Abdul Razak, Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, which are very important books, and I mentioned to you all before, very important books to get. See who even holds that. Right? I'm just going to pause the recording for a second, just open it up. This chapter, Al-Wudu min Luhum al-Ibn. Who held the position that you do have to do that? So he mentions the hadith. Okay, now which of the Sahaba held this position? Abu Musa al-Ashari. So he's saying, so Abu Musa al-Ashari says, they slaughtered a camel and they ate it, and then they got up. يصلون بغير وضوء. They started praying without wudu. فنهاهم عن ذلك فقال ما أبالي مشيت في فرثها ودمها ولم أتوضأ وأكلت من لحمها ولم أتوضأ. He says, I wouldn't care if I had to go in its blood and still don't make wudu, or I ate from its meat, it doesn't break my wudu. So he's saying it does not break his wudu. Here he's quoting Waki' from Jabir ibn Samurah, كنا نتوضأ من لحوم الإبل. So he's saying we used to do that. There we go. So this is all I'm interested in. Jabir ibn Samurah said that we used to make wudu from eating camel meat. Khalas. Thank you very much. So what would a Hanafi or a Maliki say is, Habibi, is Jabir ibn Samurah mufti? Was he one of the great fuqaha of the Sahaba? And who's Ja'far ibn Abi Thawr? Who's this? Who are these people? Right? I'm interested in the big shots, the big shots of the Sahaba, right? I'm not interested in Jabir. So Jabir is a Sahabi, right? So the Shafi'is or Imam Nawawi say, hang on a minute, here's a hadith that you have to do it, and then here's a Sahabi saying we used to make wudu from eating camel meat. There we go. Does that make sense? The difference? Here we have Abu Sha'tha. Amara Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, that's Sahih hadith there as it can. Um, those who said you did not have to do that, right? So far he just mentioned basically one of the Sahaba that said we used to do that. So he says, I saw Ibn Umar and he didn't do it, right? Ibn Umar didn't do that. He's one of the great fuqaha of the Sahaba. Mujahid, right? So Mujahid. So these are fuqaha. Look at this. Mujahid, faqih, student of Ibn Abbas. Ata, and Ta'us. All the students of Ibn Abbas saying no. These are the Medinan, the Meccan fuqaha. They said, no, no, you don't do that. Um, I don't know who this is. Ibn Sabra al-Nakha'i, I'm not sure. Umar al-Khattab, he ate it and did not make wudu. Okay, huge faqih. Everybody respects him. Sayyidina Umar. Hassan al-Basri, Sayyidina Ali did not make wudu. Right? Sorry, this is not Hassan al-Basri. My apologies. This is somebody else. Abdullah, I don't know who this is. From Sayyidina Ali that he did not do it. Right? Sayyidina Ali, one of the great fuqaha, the Sahaba. Not sure who this is. Somebody else did not do it. This is a killer chain. Look, Waki' ibn Jarrah from Sufyan al-Thawri, Takbir. From Mansur, I believe this is Mansur ibn al-Mu'tamir. It might be Mansur ibn Shadhan, I'm not sure. But I believe this is Mansur ibn al-Mu'tamir. From Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, Takbir. ليس في لحم الإبل والبقر والغنم وضوء. There's nothing. There's no need to do that. Right? So their approach is, look at this. Fuqaha. Why would you do that? There's no reason to do that. Oh, but there's a hadith. It's in Sahih Muslim. They're like, yeah, that's not a big deal. From Jabir ibn Samurah, yeah, he's not an important faqih. He's a thiqah, he's reliable, but that's about it. Okay? So
But
go ahead.
do you get circumstances where you have a statement like the one by Jabir ibn Thamura and you don't have alternative statements with the giants?
You might do, yeah. So this
So,
sometimes it's kind of confusing. Like it's not very clear. Like it's a bit confusing. Like you would say surely if Jabir ibn Samurah said we used to do this, surely you would have some other quotes confirming that, right? Because if Joad said, yeah, when I lived in the States, they used to have this big franchise called McDonald's. Okay, so if it was big and it used to be there, surely there's somebody else. So basically, we're looking through centuries of information, right? So there's a lot of information that's lost. So it's not that clear. Okay, but can you see the method? The method of Imam Malik would be, I studied with Nafi'. Ibn Umar did not say this. Qasim Muhammad, the nephew, raised by Aisha, she didn't say this. Nobody in Medina does that. Nobody in Medina does it. Khalas, we can ignore it. Imam Shafi says, well, Medina doesn't know everything. Right? That would be the approach. They don't know everything. Maybe they've never heard this quote that I've heard. So there's a problem which is being too taqlidi, like, oh, they must know everything. Maybe they don't know everything. So Ibrahim al-Nakha'i is like, yeah, we don't do that. Right? He's saying that, but maybe he's heard that. So you could maybe ask Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, have you ever heard of anybody doing this? So, yeah, I heard some of the Salaf doing that. Okay, so I have a Sahih hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. What am I supposed to do with it? And it's not just one, right? Let's go back to our text. Not just one. This is the problem. Is it's very convenient to follow that approach. Oh, these are the fuqaha, but you know. So here, so he says, حدثنا محمد بن يحيى قال حدثنا أبو حذيفة قال حدثنا سفيان. I believe this is Sufyan al-Thawri, I believe. عن سماك بن حرب عن جعفر ابن أبي ثور. This is the person, I don't know who he was. عن جابر ابن سمرة أن رجلا سأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال أتتوضأ, right? Or أتوضأ, should I, من لحوم الغنم. قال لا. قال أفأصلي في مراح الغنم, the places where the animals, the sheep rest. قال نعم. قال فأتوضأ من لحوم الإبل. قال نعم. قال أصلي في أعطان الإبل, in a camel pen. قال لا. So the Prophet said, should I do that? I said, yeah. Right. حدثنا محمد بن يحيى قال حدثنا محاضر الهمداني قال حدثنا الأعمش, right, عن عبد الله بن عبد الله عن عبد الرحمن ابن أبي ليلى. So he's a thiqah. His son Muhammad ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Layla is not. His son is the faqih. He's a muhaddith, right? So we see Abdurrahman ibn Layla, he's reliable. His son Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman, that's the Ibn Abi Layla that had the great debates with Imam Abu Hanifa, right? So you see these two different worlds. His son is more of a faqih than he is, but his son is not a good hadith narrator, right? So should I study hadith fiqh with people like Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla, or should I study fiqh with people who have the great debates? You know, like Plato and Aristotle, right? Like there was these great debates in fiqh between Ibn Abi Layla, his son, Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla, and Imam Abu Hanifa, the great debates, right? That was gathered together by Qadi Abu Yusuf. So how does fiqh work? Like, is it based on the fuqaha or based on hadith? Right? So here from An-Bara ibn Azib. So you say this hadith is a mistake, okay? As a faqih, you said he's a mistake. He's not, Jabir's not a faqih, he made a mistake or whatever. Okay, but somebody else just confirmed him. عن البراء بن عازم قال جاء رجل إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال أصلي في مبارك الإبل قال لا قال أفأتوضأ من لحومها قال نعم قال أصلي في مرابض same thing the pens of sheep pens قال نعم قال أفأتوضأ من لحومها قال لا right قال أبو محمد ورواه عثمان بن وأشعث بن عن جابر he mentions other chains. So what do we do now? Do you say there's no consensus on either way, of course. So do we say the big fuqaha like Ibn Umar and Ibrahim al-Nakhai said no? And Imam Malik confirmed that, and Imam Abu Hanifa confirmed that, right? And Ibn Abbas, he said wudu is for what goes out, not what goes in, right? That's a principle for Imam Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas faqih. So what they say, do I say the great fuqaha, not just the fuqaha, the great fuqaha of the Sahaba said no, and these hadiths are saying yes? Or do I say, Habibi, you Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Rasulullah. He asked this question. Somebody said, you're Rasulullah. Do I have to make wudu? He said, yes. On two separate occasions. What are you going to do on Judgment Day? When you get to the pool and the Prophet pushes you away and says, Habibi, I told you, two of my Sahaba told you this. Why didn't you listen to me? Right? And subhanAllah, when you read the Risala of Imam Shafi'i begins like who's heard of that dua كلما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن غفله وغفل عن ذكره الذاكرون الغافلون. Who's heard that, right? وصلي على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. You heard that? Have people heard that before?
I have
Yes.
not.
Who said that? Imam Shafi'i. That's Imam Shafi'i invented that. That's so Imam Shafi'i in the beginning, like extreme love for the Prophet. What are you going to do on Judgment Day? When two of the Sahaba said this, and then you go and eat camel meat and you don't make wudu. Oh, because Ibrahim Nakhai is not the Prophet, Habibi. Ibn Umar is not the Prophet. They don't know everything. Right? Ibn Umar didn't know about wiping on khufs until somebody told him. Right? Not even Imam Abu Hanifa doesn't follow Ibrahim Nakhai in everything. Right? So like it's nice to idealize that hadith is the ultimate source and nothing else counts, but it's not true. And it's nice to idealize that, oh, the fuqaha of the Sahaba, it's not all of the Sahaba. It's not all of the information. It's nice to idealize and say one is obviously clear, but it's not an easy situation, is it? So this is a very good vignette of the difference between the Shafi'i-Hanbali approach versus the Maliki-Hanafi approach. Both have strengths and weaknesses. That's why it's ijtihad. And they say, subhanAllah, the only person who can really weigh up the two different approaches is the mujtahid himself. Like you couldn't be in a situation where you've studied enough and you're like, yeah, I understand why I'm Shafi'i, or I understand why I'm Hanafi. Unless you were actually a mujtahid imam. Does that make sense? Like you couldn't get to that point. Just like Jawad, for example, his field, like the only way you could weigh up between two things that he's judging between is if you were he. And in which case you're going to have your own ijtihad anyway. Right? But what I'm trying to do is help us understand a manhaj. Ibn Jarud, he's a Shafi-esque kind of person. That's the world he works in. Thiqat, who narrates this hadith, that narrate, da da da. He's not the world of fiqh, right? He's working in the world of hadith, right? Are these people accurate, right? Whereas Imam Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi, is like a totally different world, right? It's a totally different world. Imam Malik, khalas, this is what the people of Medina do, that's it. So Imam Malik will quote a hadith and go against it. He says, listen, we don't apply this hadith. So it's super sahih hadith. There's no question about it whatsoever. Who made the mistake? Nobody made the mistake. We're not saying there's a mistake in the wording. We're saying that's not what it means. Why? That's not what the people of Medina do. Right? That's 100% Imam Malik's approach. And that could be right and could be wrong. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? So there's a really key thing. SubhanAllah, this is your rizq, right? Don't I'm not talking about my knowledge, but your rizq. This book, okay, this book that I quoted from, I was looking for this book for a long time. I gave it to somebody. It was really, I read that section. It was really, really good. Well organized, right? Very nice. Okay, and I was looking for that section. I was looking for the book itself for the last like a year and a half. And I couldn't get it. No, it was always out. It's always out of print, out of print, out of print. Couldn't get it. I'd given it to somebody, then it was out of print. SubhanAllah. Then somebody went on Umrah and got it for me. Then I came here to Malaysia. Then I didn't have my books. Then didn't have time to pick up the book. Didn't have time to do this. It's like SubhanAllah, you want to sleep, right? This is so write it down, right? The whole concept of the Luhum al-Ibl is a very good vignette of the different approaches, right? The Hanafis are like pulling their hair out, like, bro, what has what has eating camel meat got to do with wudu? There's not at all in our systems that we have in our fuqaha, right? Imam Malik has a chapter on it. We don't do that. Khalas, gone. Whereas the hadith is sahih, Imam Nawawi, you got to act upon it. Khalas. Two sahih hadith, two separate sahih hadiths. He says, that you can't explain it in any other way. So how do you apply this? I don't know. Good point. Now, ethically, we can easily solve it. Just make wudu anyway, right? Make wudu out of precaution, right? But it's a good picture of the difference of agreement, of different how this works. Does that make sense? Now, there's certain hyperboles or certain extra things on either side. So the way that the sheikh is talking, he's using certain kind of language that sounds a bit extreme, right? They didn't care about what any Sahabi would say. It's not true, right? That's not true. They are interested in ijma', but it's quite hard to prove ijma', right? It's a very different kind of approach. If you're talking to a Hanafi, the Hanafi is not interested in any of this. The Maliki is not interested in any of this. And you're like, but the hadith is sahih. It's like, you're not interested. That's not how fiqh works. Does that make sense? For them. So what makes the position of a Nawawi and Ikhtiyar and not a Mu'tamad? Because he's saying this in my opinion, I'm not representing the school. Whereas he, as an editor of the school, that's the school. He's saying, I'm looking at the school, and this is the position of the school. Right? So if you compare it with the issue of Maghrib, Imam Shafi'i sees the Shafi'is, a lot of them siding with the sign that Maghrib ends at Isha and not after praying it. And then he says Imam Shafi had this position, and look at Imam Shafi's words and works and all these things. He's saying that actually the school is actually the Qadim and not the Jadid. Right. So I'm now intentionally putting words in Imam Shafi, in the words of I'm putting words into the mouth of the school and saying the school is that Maghrib ends at Isha, as opposed to the mere ikhtiyar, which I personally disagree. I'm not saying that the school says that eating camel meat breaks wudu, but I'm saying my opinion is, right? But it's still relevant because he's still working as a Shafi'i, right? He's still working as a Shafi'i. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, I mean, what's the reasoning to the school gives if the Shafi'i approach is to let the text speak generally? Yeah. So what we're saying is the general approach agrees, but the specific answer in the Shafi'i school is not. So the Shafi'is, they have an answer for this. They're looking at it in a different way, and they don't look at it in this. They don't look at it in this way. And if you look at the way that the Shafis talk about this, they would not. It is not represent you, on a specific level. It does not. It's not representative of them to say that eating how many breaks of wudu, because they've all been saying this and this and this and this and this, and they will have other explanations. So he's talking about on a level. So there's different levels. There is, well, you got it right. So there's the approach versus the actual answer, right? So you are a psychologist working in a Freudian approach. You might necessarily agree with Freud though, right? As opposed to, do you think Freud meant this or this? I said he meant this, but I disagree with him. Can you see that? There's an approach, and then there is the application of that approach. So said, look at these 10,000 people applying this approach. It's not fair for me to say that their conclusion is this, right? But it is fair to me to say I'm going to reapply the approach and in my own way and disagree. Okay, inshallah, I'm going to stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.